In this Circuits of the Past video, Herman shows you both versions of the old Mettet Street Circuit in Belgium. We'll start with the layout that was in use from 1932 right the way through to 1990. That's a fair old era. The first corner of this version of the Mettet Circuit was a fast left kink. However, because it's now public road, Herman had to take this strange intersection into it. It's hardly the racing line. And it actually is kind of like a square roundabout. Is that called a squareabout? Thinking emojis and answers on a postcard, please. After the full throttle kink, as in our case after the squareabout, there's a very fast ascent into the town of Mettet. The length of this version of the Mettet circuit was 8.368 kilometres, or 5.2 miles, and counted just 8 corners. The most typical aspect of this street circuit is that it contained 4 artificial high-banked corners. As you can see, there's no runoff here at all, but instead there are houses and electricity poles. This was a section that separated the boys from the men. We now approach the first artificial banked corner, named Virage Mettet, which is French for Mettet Corner. Incidentally, there are actually 2 versions of the banked corner here. However, it's not known the exact time of which each corner was introduced. In the very first version, though, it was just a normal street corner. First, the street corner was replaced by this abandoned banked corner. Later, they built it up to be an even faster banked corner. Look at the size of that banking! As I said, it's not known exactly when which corner was in use. Different sources are unclear about the history of the Mettet Street Circuit, and it seems like there was already motorcycle races around Mettet in the early 1920s. We're now in a fast climbing section of the street circuit. This section contains one natural kink that leads to a second artificial banked corner. Meanwhile, I want to introduce to you the driver. That's Herman Lischemeyer, founder of the Circuits of the Past website and YouTube channel. I'm Simon Smith and I do the voiceovers. I also run a gaming channel called Higher Plane Games if you fancy it. We now approach the second artificial corner. As you can see, there's also a part that goes straight on, where we take the banked corner from. This second banked corner leads onto a very long full throttle section with only one kink on the squareabout. The rest of this section is straight on, up to, you guessed it, the next artificial banked corner. It's like an oval gone wrong, this one. Take a look on the right. There you'll see a sign from the squareabout. And here Herman needs to make a detour instead of a fast full throttle kink which was used during the races. So now we're set sail on the long straight. Let me tell you a little bit more about the history of the Mettet Street Circuit. Got your snacks? Good one. So as I said before, motorcycle racing started here in the 1920s. According to a local legend, it started with a group of friends who tried out the local roads with their motorcycles. Actually, they did the same with what Herman did with his car in the early 90s around Assen. And you can hear about that in another video. One of these bikers was a guy by the name of Auguste Galloy. He wanted to impress his friends, no doubt a lady was involved, by riding a loop on roads around Mettet. According to the story, he was unable to turn off his motorcycle after doing one lap of the loop, so to save face he carried on for another lap, and another, and another. It wasn't until he was running out of fuel on his 6th lap that he could finally stop. That brought people to the idea to organise motorcycle races around the roads of Mettet. We're now approaching the 3rd artificial corner of the circuit. This one also replaced a street corner, which is actually still legal road here. As you can see, Herman ignores the prohibited entry signs and will show you this banked corner. Don't say Herman doesn't put his life on the line for you. At the end of the corner, Herman needs to slow down to check if there is any traffic coming from the legal route. Under the guidance of Jules Descheny, a local garage owner and motorsports enthusiast, a motorsport union was founded in January of 1927. Their goal was to organise motorcycle races in the region of Mettet. On September 11th, 1927, they organised their first event on a 2.8 kilometres or 1.74 miles street circuit, and that would remain in use until 1931. We're now at the 4th and final artificial corner of this version of the Mettet Circuit. After this corner follows the long straight right back to the start-finish. Here Herman had to be extra careful when re-entering the public road. And then this happened. Clearly that car's going to struggle with the 107% rule. Since 1932, they organised the event on the longer layout that we're driving in now. However, in 1932, they drove it anti-clockwise. From 1933 onwards, they changed the driving direction to clockwise, which is exactly the way that we're going around it now. In those early years, they made use of street corners instead of these artificial banked corners. The banked corners were built later. To make the fast ascent into Mettet, which we saw at the beginning of this video, a little bit more safer, they later created a detour onto a business park on the left-hand side. However, the exact location of this detour is still not known. We're now back at the start-finish area and we can take a look back to the fast Alpine. Now we start our lap on the 1991 to 2009 version of the Mettet Street Circuit. Since 1991, the dangerous descent was abandoned, so they turned right after the start-finish area straight onto, you guessed it, the long straight. To reduce speeds even more, they added 3 chicanes to the straights. That's like Le Mans times a half. These chicanes look like the famous bus stop chicane, which we all know from Spa-Francorchamps. As I said earlier, the first races at the Mettet Circuit were for motorcycles only. However, later in the 1950s, it started to host Formula 2 races for cars. The main events, however, would always be for motorcycles. In the 1990s, they started to think about a replacement for the ultra-fast and dangerous street circuit. The dream was to build a permanent racetrack. Little by little, the surrounding land was bought up to build the permanent racetrack there. In 2010, the dream of a permanent racetrack became a reality with the commissioning of the current circuit, close to the old pit building. Here we are at the first chicane. As you see, it looks like the old bus stop chicane from Spa-Francorchamps. Also at Chimay, another street circuit in Belgium, you find these types of double chicanes. So it seems like bus stop chicanes were really popular in the 80s and 90s in Belgium. So here we are for the second time at the artificial banked corner, which was the first one in this version of the Mettet Street Circuit. As an aside, that first chicane that we just went through was not used for every race class. Classic motorcycles just ploughed straight through that chicane and carried on. The other 2 chicanes, however, were used for all classes. We now approach the second chicane, which is not accessible at this time. We can see that chicane now on our left hand side. So, here's a second banked corner on the 1990 to 2009 circuit layout. Fingers crossed we don't end up in Tractor World Championships on the exit. We're now back on the fast straight where we can see the sprint of the Alpine from our previous lap. This straight brings us to the final chicane, which is the entrance to the new permanent circuit. The new circuit is named after Jules Tacheny, which I mentioned earlier in this video. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 77 in a crash on a public road in 1984. Ironically, it was on the track of the street circuit of Fleuref, where he celebrated so many victories. So here we are at the last chicane. Behind the fence on our right hand side is the new permanent circuit. Sadly, it was closed on the day Herman visited to film the footage. Maybe he can sneak back in a future visit. You'll also see that this chicane is closed off for traffic, so Herman got out and explored it with his own 2 feet. So now we're back on the start-finish straight, and on our right hand side we have the exit of the chicane. That brings us to the end of our lap. If you want to read Herman's blog post about his visit to the old Mettet Street Circuit, pop over to circuitsofthepast.com. On that website you'll find loads of information about lost racing circuits, and you can also download a free ebook about 7 abandoned racetracks that you can visit legally. For now though, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click on that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next video from another bygone Circuit of the Past.